This happened about 6 years ago when I moved into my first apartment on my own. It was a quiet neighborhood, full of semi-detached houses with well-kept gardens and lights that went out early. My apartment had a big living room window that looked directly into the house across the street, and I could see their living room. It was all pretty normal, a brown sofa, a bookshelf full of books. But after a few weeks, something started to bother me. The neighbor. He was an elderly, thin man with disheveled white hair and a faded blue bathrobe. He was always sitting in the living room armchair, staring in my direction. Morning, afternoon, night, he was there, motionless. I felt watched all the time, that unsettling feeling of not having any privacy. What made me most nervous was the way he looked. At first, I thought he might have some kind of physical problem, like the after effects of a stroke or another neurological issue. But it wasn't a passive stare. It was a fixed gaze that seemed to be studying my every move. I started closing the curtains, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It was as if those eyes were still there, piercing through the fabric. One day, returning from work, the temperature was lower, and a thin mist was already rising from the asphalt. I approached my door, fumbling for my keys in my pocket, and felt a shiver when I looked at my mailbox. There was a small card. The paper was rough and the handwriting was shaky, as if an old hand had written it. Something told me it had to do with that old man. I opened it, and my heart stopped. It said, "Your window is open. Be careful." I went inside, locked everything, and threw myself on the sofa. After a moment of hesitation, my heart racing, my mind unsure if it was real, if I should brush it off or if I should look out the window, I decided to look. And there he was, staring fixedly at my window. The streetlight illuminated his armchair. He was sitting, looking at my house, and I could see the silhouette of his face. He had a smile, a minimal, almost imperceptible smile, as if he knew he had scared me. And he had. I called the police, explained what had happened, but they just told me they couldn't do anything as he hadn't committed any crime. I moved out a week later. This story didn't happen to me, but to a friend of mine. It was in late 2017 when his son, a little boy named Gabriel, was about 5 years old. The boy had an imaginary friend he called Shadow. At first it was cute, even expected based on what they'd read about his age. He said they played hide and seek and that Shadow was very good at it. But what was supposed to be innocent began to get sinister. My friend and his wife would hear strange noises in the middle of the night, laughter even while the child was sleeping, the soft sound of footsteps in the corridor, but they couldn't see anything. It was all strange, but they always found a rational explanation. The house is old, or it must be street noise, things like that. However, things got scarier when they started finding things out of place. Food that disappeared from the fridge, objects that moved from room to room. They thought they were just being forgetful, but the frequency was too much to be just forgetfulness. One day, my friend was in the attic to fix a leak, and he smelled a strong odor of mold and dust. He realized that a part of the wall seemed hollow. When he pushed it, he found a small passage that led to a storage area on the roof. Inside, he found a dirty old mattress, some blankets, and what looked like stacks of empty chip bags and juice boxes. But what made my friend scream and panic was his son's favorite stuffed animal, which had been missing for weeks. It was there, lying on the mattress, dirty, as if it had been handled daily. At that moment, they realized that their son's imaginary friend was not imaginary. It was a real person who lived in the attic. They called the police immediately. When they arrived, my friend explained the situation and the police conducted a thorough search of the house until they found a basement window with a broken latch. That's how the shadow would come and go. They didn't find anyone there that day, but knowing that someone was silently moving through their house, playing with their son, while they lived their lives normally, was terrifying enough for my friend and his family to move out immediately. They still wonder how they never noticed anything, how it was possible for someone to be practically invisible like that. But at the same time, they're grateful that nothing serious happened to their family. It was in the winter of 2023. The house across the street had been empty for months. The windows were like lifeless eyes, dark and dirty. I didn't care until one night I noticed a blinking light in the second-floor window. It was a fast white dot that broke the heavy darkness of the early morning. At first I thought it was a reflection, and I even looked around to find where the light was coming from, but after a few nights, the pattern continued. I started paying attention and realized that the light wasn't random. It pulsed at a strange rhythm. After my curiosity was piqued, I thought it might mean something, and harmlessly grabbed paper and a pen. I sat on my living room floor trying to decipher the message using Morse code, which I knew a little bit about. With the help of an online guide, I managed to translate the first letters. It was working. It was forming words that made sense. But when I formed the first sentence, my blood ran cold. My heart started beating so fast I swore the neighbor could hear it. It said, "We are watching you." My eyes widened, the hair on my arms stood up, and I froze for a moment. The fear was real. We? Who were they? What did they want from me? Were they real? How could someone live in that house? There was nothing inside the house. It was empty. Millions of thoughts raced through my mind in that instant. In a panic, I called the police, told them more or less what had happened, and the way I told it, they understood I had been threatened. When they arrived, they searched the house and the surrounding area, but found nothing and no one. The house was empty, with no signs of invasion or that someone was living there. At most, there were some papers and normal dirt from a move-in. A little embarrassed, this time I calmly told them about the message. The police looked at me with suspicion, said they couldn't do anything, made themselves available if something serious happened, and left. I sat on my bed with all the lights off. The silence of the night was heavy. I felt exhausted but couldn't sleep. Then I heard a soft sound, something tapping on my window. It was on my bedroom window. It wasn't branches or anything from the street, as the window was far from anything. I jumped and stood motionless by the bed. I thought for a moment it was my imagination, but the sound repeated, louder now. I approached the window, pulled back the curtains, and I could see the silhouette of something or someone among the bushes outside the house. And on my window pane, in the reflection of the cold street lamp's glow, there were 3 fingerprints smudged with dirt. I made sure all the doors and windows of the house were closed the curtains, and stayed in the living room, awake all night, with the television on, so I wouldn't hear noises and would try not to think about what had happened. I don't know if it was someone playing a prank on me. All I know is that it was enough for me to move the next day. I've never looked at a window the same way again.